Time there's a vehicle crash and someone dies from it, it's heartbreaking. But the silver lining is that we learn from what went wrong so we can do better next time. There's one agency highly involved in this work. Today we're going to check in with a safety investigator from the National Transportation Safety Board to find out how their recommendations have helped move roadway safety in the school bus industry forward. This episode of The Route is sponsored by IC Bus. The next generation is here and is ahead of its class. Let's get rolling. The NTSB plays a critical role in vehicle crashes, from on-the-scene investigations and ensuing safety suggestions. In fact, the agency just released its report on a 2023 crash in Excelsior, Wisconsin. There, a 17-year-old didn't stop in time for a school bus. The teenage driver swerved just before impact, sideswiping the school bus in front of them, then continuing across the paved shoulder onto a private driveway. The impact killed a 13-year-old student who was waiting for the bus. In this case, the NTSB determined that the pickup truck didn't stop in time because the driver was texting on his cell phone. Distracted driving is becoming all too common, and this report prompted NTSB to issue a safety alert. They urged drivers to use features like Do Not Disturb and driving focus while behind the wheel, and not calling or texting someone else who you know is driving. The agency also reiterated its 2020 recommendation that cell phone manufacturers install lockout mechanisms that automatically disable certain features while driving. But while Excelsior is the agency's newest report, there are several others that show trends in school bus-related crashes. So let's bring in Meg Sweeney, accident investigator at the NTSB, to hear firsthand what the team there is focused on. Right. I am now joined by Meg Sweeney, accident investigator from the NTSB. Meg, thank you so much for joining us on an episode of The Route. We're happy to chat about all things school bus safety today.
Thank you for having me.
All right. So, Meg, I think probably a lot of our readers know who your agency is, but go ahead and give us a brief overview just for anyone who's not sure.
NTSB is a federal agency. It's an independent agency. We are a non-regulatory agency, meaning we don't write rules. Instead, we issue recommendations. The NTSB's mission, and one that we're tasked with, is to investigate crashes, determine the probable cause of those crashes, and issue recommendations to prevent future crashes. And we investigate in multiple modes of transportation, including aviation, railroad, marine, pipeline, and of course highway. And our highway office is the office that's responsible for school bus crashes. We are a relatively small agency overall, with only about 400 to 450 people nationwide. And our highway office is even smaller, with only about 35 to 40 people in our office. Once we go on scene, we gather information, we collect perishable information. After that, we analyze all of that, and we eventually put together a final report. That final report is approved by our board members. We are run by a 5-member board that our president nominate, and Senate confirms them. And once that report is published and approved and published, we then work with our stakeholders to implement the recommendations that were issued.
Explain your role as accident investigator and what the process looks like when there is a school bus crash, and what exactly you do and what comes from that.
Sure. In our highway office is the office that's responsible for investigating school bus crashes. The first step is determining which crashes to investigate. Unlike aviation, which is charged with investigating all civil aviation crashes, obviously with such a small staff, we cannot investigate every highway crash.
Yeah.
And so we have to be a little bit more selective. And so we have to focus on those crashes that have a potential for a system-wide or a nationwide change. So the first thing we want to do is select our crashes. And when we do launch to a crash, we take a multidisciplinary approach to that. We launch with investigators who have different specialty areas. For example, our human performance investigator will examine factors that are related to the driver. For example, they might look at driver fatigue or cell phone use or driver training and experience. We'll launch an investigator who has a specialty in the vehicle. On scene, they always do post-crash inspections of the vehicles to see if there was any potential vehicle defects that could have led to the crash. They also look at ways technology could have prevented a crash from happening. We send a motor carrier specialist, somebody who will look at the policies and procedures of the motor carrier. When we investigate a school bus crash, that person will look most likely at a school district or perhaps a contractor who would have been responsible for the operations of that school bus. And finally, we send a survival factors person. These are people who look at crash worthiness, and they also look at the emergency response post-crash. Make sure that that it was a timely and adequate response. The highway investigators as well, or our highway investigators who want to look at the roadway and make sure there were no issues with the roadway. They'll also look at the infrastructure, so if there was a tunnel or a bridge as a factor.
Sure, okay. I want to clarify, when you said technology, are you talking about technology on the bus, like if they were using driver monitoring cameras or telematics, or?
So yes, usually our vehicle investigators would look at the potential for vehicle technology that could have prevented a crash had the bus been equipped with it, or what it was equipped with, what type of equipment it had installed on it, and did it work properly.
Sure, okay. Awesome. So share a few of the more recent and prominent school bus crashes that you have investigated, and the outcomes and, well, the recommendations that came from those. Basically, what did we learn?
Sure. So to begin with, school buses are a very safe form of transportation. Every day, they transport millions of students. However, crashes still occur. And when we investigate, we find ways of looking at methods to improve that safety. One way we do that is through our recommendations. And if you look at our recommendations, you'll see that they fall into different categories in general, like safe user, safe vehicle, safe roads, and post-crash safety.
Yeah, can you go into like your Excelsior crash report just came out? Kind of walk us through what came out of that, or some of the other more notable ones. There was one in Indiana.
So it's in our Rochester, Indiana crash. That's a good example of recommendations where we issued several recommendations on different fronts. In that crash in Rochester, a bus had stopped on his morning route to pick up students to bring them to school. A vehicle approaching from the opposite direction failed to stop and struck the students crossing the street. 3 of the students died and 1 was seriously injured. In addition to making recommendations on education and enforcement, such as making sure our drivers, or improving the education to make sure our drivers know of their responsibility to stop for a school bus that has its red lights flashing, we made a recommendation to the industry to minimize the use of routes that require students to cross a roadway, particularly a high-speed roadway, to board a bus, and to eliminate that obstacle.
Yeah. Okay. What are there any other of the processes we follow now as an industry because of what came out of crashes or your recommendations?
I think we've seen some increases in things such as our advanced technology. Right? We being installed on vehicles. We've investigated crashes and issued recommendations for collision avoidance technologies such as forward collision warning, or even automatic emergency braking warning systems that alert the driver that there's a potential crash, and emergency braking, where the brakes automatically engage or help supplement the driver's braking. Electronic stability control, which helps helps a driver maintain control of a vehicle, and even lane departure prevention systems and warning systems to warn and prevent a driver from departing from their lane.
Yeah.
Another technology that's very useful is onboard cameras. These are cameras that record the activities of what's going on inside the school bus and often outside the school bus as well. And they provide an opportunity to observe behaviors of the students and the drivers, as well as outside activity, the activities of vehicles in the other way. And this is a really useful tool in terms that the video footage can be used as a training tool to improve student behavior as well as driver behavior. The second piece of that is that the information that is obtained provides a wealth of information for when we investigate crashes and can lead to improved safety recommendations. And another example of where our recommendations have led to safety improvements is focused on the drivers and our safe users. So, drivers, of course, are responsible for taking our children from home to school every day. And we want to make sure that those drivers are qualified, fit, and capable of driving. And we've investigated crashes where drivers had medical issues or complications that led to the crash or contributed to the crash. And so we've made recommendations for drivers being able to pass physical requirement tests, and we've also made recommendations related to the oversight of drivers that the motor carriers, or in this case school districts, can oversee the drivers and make sure their documents are correct.
Yeah, through FMCSA and all that.
Yes.
Okay. Now, to switch a little bit here, I want to talk about seatbelts, because I know that NTSB has put out a recommendation or a statement that you do support seatbelt use, especially its role in crashes. And it can be a little bit of a controversial issue in the industry. So explain to us what's behind your stance.
So based on our findings and of our school bus crash investigations, we do support the installation of lap and shoulder belts on large school buses. And this recommendation goes back as far as 1999, when the NTSB issued a special investigation on bus crash worthiness. And in that report, we issued 2 recommendations to the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration. The one was to develop performance standards for school bus occupant protection for systems that account for frontal, side, and rear impact collisions and rollover collisions. And then we asked them to require that newly manufactured buses be required to install these protective systems. Finally, in 2008, NHTSA issued a final rule and set performance standards for lap and lap shoulder belts for large school buses. It is a voluntary standard.
Yeah. Okay. Another issue that just came up recently at a conference I came back from was fire suppression in school buses, and particularly in special needs school buses. I sat in a presentation from the gentleman with FireGator. It came up at NCST as a suggestion, but had a little traction, but ultimately wasn't passed. What's your take on that technology?
So we have investigated crashes where there was fire involved in the school bus. Mm-hmm. I think the most recent crash perhaps was Oakland, Iowa, and in that crash we did make recommendations related to fire suppression requirements.
Yeah. See, the last question I have for you then is just, what other safety issues around the school bus are you watching that we haven't talked about yet, if there is anything else?
I think whenever I'm involved with a school bus investigation, I'm always reminded of how complex the transportation system is and the wide range of circumstances that need to be considered in providing safe transportation for our students. And over time, those circumstances can change. And so as part of our jobs, we monitor changing and emerging safety issues. And I think one example of an emerging issue is the rise of autonomous vehicles. These vehicles will be sharing the road and interacting with school buses. And I think another possible example is the increase of alternative transportation for students, transportation other than a school bus. And so we'll continue to monitor these issues and see and determine the impact on school transportation safety.
Yeah, you're right. Both are definitely becoming big fast. There's a new Alternative Transportation Association that just launched. So some more collaborative efforts that are really forming. Everdriven just announced that they've, had record users. And then, we also heard in the news that some of the Tesla autonomous vehicles were not detecting, fake children, and were actually hitting them. So that's obviously concerning. So we'll see how that unfolds, but hopefully no more deaths is always the cause, right? Or the goal.
Right.
Yeah. Okay. Is there any one thing you would want to say to transportation directors or other school bus officials watching this right now? What's the key takeaway you want them to have?
Safety is taken very seriously in the school bus world. I think the crash and fatality rates reflect that viewpoint. We're just about down to, we have been down to single digits in our school bus occupant fatalities, and I think we're seeing a decline in other types of school bus related fatalities as well. And I think that we continue down the road we're going, we can achieve a zero fatality with school bus transportation.
Yeah, hopefully we'll get there. Awesome, Meg. Well, we thank you and we thank the NTSB for your role in school bus safety. So thank you for what you do, and thank you for being here today and sharing your expertise with school bus fleet. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
I want to thank agencies like the NTSB and NHTSA for their focus on safety. I also saw Meg at the National Congress on School Transportation last May, so it's great seeing her so involved and invested in the business of student transportation. So remember, no texting and driving, and help us promote safe driving so we can reach zero preventable fatalities. Check out the links below to learn more about school bus safety, NTSB reports, and even more resources. That's it for today, but you can find more school bus headlines and hot topics on our website anytime. Be sure to follow our YouTube channel and connect with us on social media. And a big thank you to our sponsor of the route, IC Bus, proudly offering vehicles and solutions that are ahead of its class. We'll see you again soon. Thanks for riding with us.